We're joined today by Father Tom McHenry, the rector of St. Stephen's Anglican Church in Clifton Forge. Good morning.
Good
Tom.
morning. How are you, Jerry?
We're here to talk about veteran service and community service, and the fellow next to me is good at both. Has had a long history of that. Where did Tom McHenry grow up?
I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. Lived there till I was 22, and then I went in the service.
And what precipitated that? Was that just a feeling that you wanted to serve? You wanted to learn more about the military? Did you want to be a chaplain?
Well, primarily it was because I was between school and I had the choice, I guess, of enlisting or being drafted. And the options for those who were drafted didn't seem as good as being going ahead and enlisting on my own.
And where did you begin your military service?
I began in the Army. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training, and then I was sent to Fort Sam, Houston, where I was trained as a medic. Spent about almost a year there at Fort Sam, and then I got orders to deploy to Germany. I went to the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Infantry, which was an armored infantry battalion stationed on the border between East and West Germany.
And didn't you relate at one time that you were there when the Berlin Wall?
The time that we were there, the Berlin Wall was being built, so there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen, what might happen. We were sort of thought of as a tripwire. We had a battalion of infantry and some armor, and on the other side of the border in East Germany were supposed to be something like 8 divisions. So we would have sort of been a bump in the road as they
Tank divisions probably
Tank
as well,
divisions,
right?
A lot of them were, yeah.
And so your service, why did you decide on the medical side of service?
Well, at one point I had thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I had gone to school in pre-med, but things happened, and the Army gave me the opportunity to continue that training, and I thought perhaps when I got through I might go back and consider medical school.
And how long of a period were you in Germany?
I was there for almost, a little over 2 years in Germany itself, out of a 3-year enlistment. So it was...
But one term wasn't good enough for Tom McHenry. You came back to civilian life, and for some reason you said, let's do it again.
Well, I came back, finished college, and went to graduate school for a year, and then I went to work in Washington, D.C., working for the Navy, and a friend talked me into enlisting in the Naval Reserve. So because I had prior military service, they were able to transfer me in grade, which means I didn't lose anything. And I spent the next 20 years in the Naval Reserve as a hospital corpsman.
And somewhere along the line, we have a substantial religious education. How did that all fit in?
Well, I suppose it had to do with... my wife and I were looking for a church when we had moved, and we found the Anglican Catholic Church in Arlington, Virginia. We started going there, got very active and involved in that, and when it was pretty clear that I was about to retire, when I was going to be retiring, I was thinking about what I might do, and it's as though, that little voice says, maybe you should be a minister. And I went and talked to my bishop, and he got a grin on his face and said, I was wondering when you were going to come and talk to me. So I think he knew before I did.
He knew you were a possibility, right?
Yeah, he knew before I did. So lo and behold, I did some training. I spent a year as a chaplain at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and then I was ordained, spent almost 3 years in Roanoke, and then I came up here.
And how did you find your way to Clifton Forge?
Well, the man who was here before me, Father Bill Kreitz at St. Stephen's, and many people will remember him, he was here for a long time. He announced that he was going to retire, and the bishop sent my name, as well as a couple of others, to the churches for them to interview, and they selected me. That was 16 years ago, so
Wow.
I've been here 16 years now.
Well, you're one of the most recognizable faces in our small town here. And whenever a project's going on, I see your face. I see your face. Is there any special community project or element of community service that you've enjoyed the most?
Well, I'm a chaplain at the local hospital at Allegheny Regional. Well, actually, it's Lewis Gale Allegheny now. They've
Right.
changed the name. I've been a chaplain there for about 10 years, and I've enjoyed that. I'm also active in a couple of community groups. My wife and Pat Persinger have an animal rescue program called Allegheny Highlands All Breed Rescue, and I'm sort of the unofficial chaplain to that. and I've been involved with things like the Clifton Forge Irish parade on St. Patrick's Day.
We can't
And-
have that without you, by the way. That's
Well, thank you.
the shortest parade in the nation.
It is, and
it's right.
but it's a great parade, and if you haven't been, you ought to come to it. But I'm also involved in the local VFW, and of course we do a number of things in the community. And other than that, I don't have a whole lot more to do.
Well, that's quite a bit. Before we go though, with respect to your service in Germany, those were trying times. That if you're on the border and you've got 25,000 or 50,000 Soviet troops armed with T-64s or whatever they had, armor-piercing rounds or worse, did that have an effect on what kind of how you looked at life? I mean, you were right on the edge there. You had to. They could have been over the border in probably 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
So you had full divisions there and ready for the worst.
Well, that was the thing that I think I noticed, was that there was an intense concern, but on the other hand, we felt like we knew what we were doing, and we were prepared to respond if there should be a border incursion. We had regular drills where we would go to selected places and wait, and then of course they never came to anything, and we'd go back to the barracks. But we were on alert for days and even weeks at a time.
Were the regular drills that were pretty intense with respect to either the firing of artillery or planning, or the big foe, the Soviet Union, had leadership that was a little quirky at the time. It was pretty scary. That's not something that the average American has experienced.
That's true, because we were not entirely sure. You'd read in the paper one day, or you'd hear one day that they were doing this, and we'd all get a little more anxious. And then there'd be another article which would say, no, they were not going to be doing that. And of course, they were in the process of a great many nuclear tests in the Soviet Union, and we kept track of those, or we were advised of
That had to
those.
be really scary.
Well, it would have been, because of course we had nuclear weapons as well in Germany, and so you just kept thinking, well, if something goes wrong, we could all end up, atomized. Literally.
That's
was
daunting.
It was. And I would say that one of the great things was we had very fine leadership on our side. The battalion commander and the regimental commander that were there were both absolutely first-class soldiers, and they kept the men aware, but on the other hand, they kept saying, we're not going to let the fact that we're greatly outnumbered keep us from doing our job.
Well, most people who enter the military service, and many Americans no longer do because we have an all-volunteer force. But I am curious about this before we close. Most guys go into the service, do their thing, get out and perform whatever job that they choose. You decided to have a second go at.
I did. I did.
What brought that about?
Well, I think it was a chance to do something a little different. The Navy offered me the opportunity for some additional training. I received training as an environmental health inspector, health officer, preventive medicine. I ran a shot clinic at Quantico for Marines, going through there's officer program down there, what they call the basic school, and we were responsible for making sure that they were immunized against the appropriate, diseases. My last tour before I retired was with a hospital company that was mobilized for Desert Storm in 1991, and we had about half our unit was in the desert, and the other half got sent to Norway.
That's interesting.
So, well, there was a NATO exercise scheduled, and because the unit that was scheduled to be in that exercise was already in the desert, they pulled a portion of our hospital company and sent them to Norway to do this NATO exercise, because the idea was we didn't want to let the Soviets think that we could not do two things at once. We couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. So we had several Marine battalions in support of a Norwegian exercise north of the Arctic Circle, and it was cold. It was very cold.
It sounds, ladies and gentlemen, this is a life of extraordinary service. One of many individuals in the area that we're planning to talk to over the course of the next several weeks. And Father McHenry, we very much appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for having me. And I know that there'll be other interesting stories from several men here in this
Probably none more
community.
interesting than yours. Thanks
Thank
again.
you.